Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Connecting Dots podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Usama, and today we are joined by Derek. He is the Defense, Intelligence, and Federal Public Safety Leader at Microsoft. So, in the upcoming conversation, let's talk to him about his role in specific, and let's get to hear his professional story as well. So, with that, we welcome you to the show, Derek. How had your day been so far?
It's been fantastic. Thanks very much, and thank you for having me.
So first of all, Derek, let's get started by your professional journey. First of all, fill us in on what kind of roles you had around the world, and what are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, so I've had a portfolio career to some extent, but perhaps less so than many people. There's one direction towards it. After graduating, I went into the military, so I was with the British Armed Forces, and then I transferred into the Canadian military. And then from that, I moved into the consulting world and subsequently into the tech sector with Microsoft. So there's been real four phases, but with a theme of specializing in either services or advice for the defense and intelligence community and the public safety community as well.
Okay, excellent. So now, if you were to double down on the current role that you have right now with Microsoft, it's a pretty long title, but for public, what does this title actually mean? What are the responsibilities that come with it, and what are the parts that really get you excited about what you do at Microsoft?
Yeah, certainly. So I run a business unit, for want of a better word, or a division within Microsoft that specializes in the provision of services and solutions for the customers that are in that title. So it's about 50% of the federal government's responsibility here in Canada is towards some aspect of either public safety or the defense intelligence sort of community in terms of the number of people in those entities. So my responsibility is to make sure that we're bringing together all of the elements that support those customers and the solution areas and engineering groups within Microsoft to make sure that we're entirely focused on the mission expectations of those organizations and that we're meeting those expectations with our services.
Right. And if you talk about your background in consulting, so what kind of power breakdowns or organizational structures that you've seen over time in your career when working with clients or other big firms, what kind of structures have you really seen in place that have really made companies succeed over time?
Well, it's an interesting question, isn't it? I think we've seen an epochal move really in the last 20 years in particular, when we've gone from an era where scientific management was the center of everything and everything was measured and marked against an organizational structure to one where we're looking at the technology and the data really that helps to drive decision making. And with that, we are in a world where we work in a much more hybrid sense between organizations, and organizational boundaries are different. So those V-team structures are quite natural, and the matrixed organizations are more natural. And I think what's more interesting for us now then is not just the organizational structure, but how you build the agility into an organization. And with that comes the alignment of the strategy, the organizational structure, the processes of the organization, the systems that are associated with that, the people, and of course the data that you're trying to move. So it's all of those pieces that have an interplay to achieve the better outcome for the organization.
Right. And now that we're seeing so many of tech layoffs, well, fortunately or unfortunately, do you think they could have been prevented? Or if not fully prevented, would they have been reduced from what they are currently now if there were any better hierarchies defined already?
Well, it's an interesting period for all industries, not least our own. But I think what's interesting is that we've clearly gone through a period of exponential growth for the pandemic, for want of a better word, that created rather extraordinary circumstances for the tech sector as people got more and more digitally orientated towards the delivery of services. Of course, the service requirement or the product requirement for our sector, like any other, is really dependent upon the demand signals of the economy. And as we hit a period of economic downturn or certainly uncertainty, we see the industry just adjusting itself to deal with that correction from what was exponential growth during an exceptional period into a period where clearly there's going to be some element of contraction. And I think across the board we see that happening. Is that dependent on the organizational structures of the organization? Probably not so much. It's an environmental circumstance. And it's undoubtedly, I think, with everyone who's in a leadership position in our sector, we feel for the people who are in the unfortunate circumstances of having lost their job. But we look at the dynamic situation and aspire towards creating the situation for that to be short-lived so that we can welcome them back into other jobs or other parts of the organizations that will be better placed for the near term.
Right, absolutely. And other than that, do you think your background in armed forces has really helped you in the position that you are in today?
I think what was interesting from my military background is that there are two pieces to it, really. There were all of my roles that were associated with leadership and those that were associated with management. Now, the two are complementary skills, but the second is much more associated with the application of resources to processes and structures to achieve outcomes for the organization, just making sure that works, the machine works, and that it's effective. The other, of course, are the leadership skills that you pick up along the way to help people to achieve their aspirations and align those aspirations with that of the organization and to be able to empower and inspire them. And so certainly having had the really great honour and absolute privilege, to be honest, to work with incredible people, it's helped me to learn a lot about the circumstances such as this so that you can move things forward. We're still in actually a fantastically interesting period with great things are happening and we've got real optimism. And I think maintaining that optimism when things around you may be there may be some friction is something that you definitely pick up in,
Right.
in the military.
And also, would it be better considering that you have your background in forces and then the clients or the public sector, specifically defense, the people over there, they have similar backgrounds with you. So maybe it'll help you understand their psyche and their needs, and maybe it'll help them understand how you guys are delivering. Maybe would that kind of help? Like that's really my thought process over here, that you guys having similar backgrounds, that does it really help streamline the job, understanding client in specific?
Of course, it always helps to be able to have some intimate knowledge of the customer and to know where they are, or the client, and to know what's happening around them and how they're responding. But that said, really having the emotional intelligence to understand them is the main thing. And I know many consultants, many business leaders who fundamentally have great relationships with their clients and customers in the defense and intelligence world. By having lived with them for a long time, they don't have to have been in that space.
And Derek, I'm very excited to ask you about leadership because as we see in movies, we hear our relatives or maybe our loved ones who have served in the forces. It's really about that mental toughness that really you need to respond quickly in terms of crisis. You need to be very rational. You need to protect your clan. And then when you poured those learnings into the tech world here, what are your personal learnings and implementations about leadership? What are your thoughts about it? How do you empower people? Like just taking the same taking the same aspect of leadership and just changing the environment, bringing it into the industry here. So what are your personal learnings about it?
It's interesting you should ask that. I've been thinking about it a lot over the last month or two. As we've gone through the last few years, there have been a lot of conversations around the importance of resilience and how we help our people to become resilient to the somewhat trying circumstances everyone's found themselves in the last 2 or 3 years. And that's undoubtedly important. So being able to coach people and empower them and enable them to be resilient is really important. But there's another piece too, I think, in that we know about the importance of personal purpose. And I think especially nowadays, people are very aware of their purpose and aligning that with organizations and them wanting to go further forward. What the military really taught me was not only the ability to be resilient, but the ability to build endurance in different circumstances, knowing that every day is not a good one, knowing that there are as many good days as there are bad days, and then expecting to make sure that you continue to endure and to push forward whilst buffeting, moving yourself and being agile to the buffeting of winds, but moving forward towards your end state or your goal, which is aligned with your own personal purpose. Now, I think that's important because people can be inclined towards thinking something is a bit tough. This might not be the job for me, or this might not be the organization. Give it some time and see where we get to. I've been really interested recently also in reading a lot with and listening to Simon Sinek, who it speaks a lot about the golden why and finding your purpose and things. But recently he's been talking a lot about the difference between infinite and finite games and being able to understand what's happening around you. And I think that speaks back to my military experience as well, understanding that the game may look like it's changing. In fact, it is changing. But it's not likely to be won in this game, set, or match. You keep going. And that, again, speaks to my belief in the importance of endurance as a person.
That's very interesting. if we talk about resilience again in terms of technical aspect, so what are your thoughts about Microsoft's readiness towards cybersecurity threats or the changing or the ever sophisticated cyber attacks that now we have? What are your thoughts about your company's preparedness about it?
I speak about that a lot because I think people are very familiar with the Microsoft brand, but probably aren't necessarily thinking about it in terms of cybersecurity all the time, unless you're a security expert or somebody who works in that field. But of course, Microsoft is actually the biggest cybersecurity firm in the world,
Yes.
both in terms of revenue, attack surface, and capability. You know that those things are important. So what I was quite astounded to learn very early on in my time here was the scope of things that we work on. So Microsoft, on behalf of the world, is monitoring 43 trillion security signals a day. In the last 12 months, defeated 70 billion attacks. Defends against 900 attacks per second.
That's a huge number.
Yeah, so when you look at
Yeah.
when we're the rather grand mission of the organization to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more, our technology is that broadly based, our attack surface is that based, and our capabilities match it, which is somewhat astounding. So that means that do things go wrong? Certainly. Do they have to be responded to? Certainly, they always will. But it's quite astounding to see the scope, scale, and ability of the firm in that sense.
That's good. That's good. It's quite reassuring that that if we rationalize it and put it in a number, it's huge. And dealing with it, it's certainly not easy. But it really brings a certain sense of calmness in me. That understanding that Microsoft is very much aware of this aspect of technology, and they're very much always there to protect their customers, their own data, and just integrity in general. So, other than that, Derek, maybe it's more from a fantasy point of view, I guess. Considering the evolution of technology that we have, can we imagine a world where we don't need passports to travel anymore? And we can have other measures of identification when we are crossing borders?
Yeah, a lot of that depends on our approach towards identity, isn't
Yeah.
it? So that's sort of electronic identity or citizen identity as we go towards that. When you look at where governments want to get to in terms of that identity aspect, I think that's exactly where we're going to get to. And there are great examples of how you get to the delivery of services that are associated with it. In terms of electronic and digital identity, the Ukraine has been doing incredible things in the last year. And we put forward, there's one of our Microsoft podcasts in the last month about just examining what the digital services have been delivered to citizens through the delivery of new digital identity technologies. And that's fantastic. But of course, other states such as Estonia have been way out in front for a long time. But most of that sense of momentum is dependent on the policy and legal frameworks in each country. And so, but governments are balancing their aspirations for the delivery of digital services, how those are associated with digital identity, and then their own legal frameworks and constraints associated with privacy. And I think once those are aligned, and every government is finding its own way, its own path forward, I think we're going to see some significant changes, and it's really exciting time.
Yeah, that's really nice. And considering the fact that now we have so much more capability just with Apple Wallet, or let's say if you just become company agnostic right now, if you just talk about this technology, I think it's really great that you can have your licenses, your documents just handy so you don't need to carry them around. It'll be really cool to live in such a world whenever the time comes that we just go completely digital at that point of time.
That's exactly how it should be, shouldn't it? I mean, when you consider it, even when you come, so certainly that would be the case for every service that we would expect in the consumer space. But when you look at the government space as well, we should be in a world where we would expect streaming services from government. We expect to be provisioned for services, so that we have access to whichever pieces, whether it's employment insurance or pensions or welfare, any welfare piece, or driving licenses, passports. They should all just be provisioned according to identity and their requirement.
Absolutely. Derek, other than any of this work talk, do you have any cool traditions in the team that you work with?
Well, it's been an interesting period, as with all teams, I think, for the last 3 years, in that we've been learning to live in a hybrid sense and see how we move things forward. I think it's less about traditions than the things that we've adopted to make sure that we're still connected and that we're able to work as a community. And I think those speak to the things other people will have embraced. We have our We have our quiz sessions, our online trivia sessions that we do together. We meet together for walks. So we've been axe throwing recently.
Nice.
It's more about those things that we do to just make sure that we're connecting in the right sense, because we don't tend to sit together in an office very much anymore.
Nice. Excellent. If you were to talk about the city of Ottawa, how long have you been here? And if you compare it with the other cities that you've lived in your career, how have you seen the city evolve?
Well, so I've been here since 2010, and Ottawa is one of those interesting cities that's sort of mid-size, isn't it? So it's a capital city, and yet it's not the largest city by a long way. What is interesting, of course, is it's dominated by government and academia. That's fine. Well, the tech sector as well, I suppose. Actually, there's the three aspects to that. But it's a relatively small city, but it's got a large geographical area, so there's very little concentration of mass. So what's obvious from a livability perspective, I do notice in comparison with other world cities, there isn't much in the downtown core. I think that's crying out for extra community. There are pockets. There are definitely pockets, but we know what we mean in the downtown core and livability there. So what has been interesting for me is watching how will the eventual connectivity of the city evolve when we see the inevitable transportation situation solve itself as we move forward. We're heading in the right direction by trying to address public transit, but that's only one aspect. How do we create more concentration, more communities, and just more vibrancy around those places in comparison with cities that I've lived in the Far East, the Middle East, Europe? There's more to go.
Excellent. And if we were to talk about academics, where did you graduate from, and provide us with a summary of the formal education that you've acquired over the course of time?
Yeah, so my initial studies were in literature, history, and philosophy at the University of Edinburgh, and I graduated with a Master of Arts from there. I then went immediately to the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. So at Sandhurst, you do postgraduate studies in leadership, strategic studies, and geopolitics, political science. So I did all of that, and so that formally took me into my career. But throughout the career, the military is actually pretty good on continuing education. So we have elements where you go to the Royal Military College of Science and study technology and systems. We then do advanced studies in management at different levels, so that we understand everything up to strategy from a grand strategic position, bringing together diplomacy, information, military power and economic power, and then how to put all of that towards campaign plans and orchestrate that with a whole of government approach. So I did a couple of pieces there at the UK Defence Academy, and then continued that in the United States Marine Corps University. So I did a year there. So all of those pieces are towards the military science. But in addition to that, I did a Master's of Business Administration with the UK's Open University, specialising in strategy, strategic human resource management, and marketing. And then on top of that, the rather normal business qualifications towards things like Lean Six Sigma, Black Belt, etc., and projects in controlled environments. So a bit of a mixed match, but all that to say, continuing to learn, to be honest. It's a lifelong journey, isn't it?
Nice. And MBA is one of my favorite topics to talk about, maybe because I haven't gotten it yet, but I like to ask people who have gotten it, what does really MBA teach you? And for someone who, let's say, is in business already, but then once they go for an MBA, what should be their expectations to in terms of learning from the course?
Yeah, I think it's understanding the fundamentals of senior leadership from the aspect of understanding what makes an enterprise tick, rather than the bit of the business that you understand because you've been working in it. How does the whole thing work together as one operating sort of entity? For me, that became really important. It came into sharp relief when I was serving in the military in Iraq, believe it or not. I was doing my normal military job, but I'm sure you can imagine what that was. But it was quite clear to me that there are many times when an organization can feel like it's achieving what it's trying to achieve, and yet you can look around and say, I know this doesn't work. And it could be something arcane, it could be procurement. I know that the HR function isn't working the way it's expected to. I'm not saying this of the British Army, I'm saying in observation, you can sense those things, that things aren't optimized. And yet, for some reason, we're telling ourselves that it is. And so I deliberately asked to do an MBA, and I did mine at the executive level. So every subject that I'd study, I'd then have to do coursework, which involved an actual live case for the organization that I was leading, which was really instructive for me. So I'd be taking back a problem that we were applying into my own organization, then discussing it with my syndicate and my leader, all of whom were from different industries. And they say, well, actually, this could be better, and this is what we're doing, this is what the doctrine is. And so gaining that understanding of how an entire enterprise works is fundamentally important. And I'll pause for one moment on that, because we probably have an idea that the military or other entities would be really different from each other. But fundamentally, if you look at the armed forces, if you looked at its enterprise operating model, it's an organization that hires people, buys things, trains people to use things, sends them off to use those things, must sustain the people, sustain the things, and make sure all the maintenance is done, etc. Then there's an HR function, an IT function, a finance function, procurement function, a real property function. Most commercial entities sound a bit like that, so you can learn a lot from each other.
Absolutely. Maybe, so let's just extrapolate this thought a little forward, Derek. Most of the universities now, when they're asking for MBA applications, they want you to write to them, what do you think MBA will help you achieve in your career, or what perspective are you bringing in? So for someone who aims to go for an MBA, what is your recommendation to prepare themselves for it? And again, if we talk about this thing, that if providing them with a statement of entry that this is how I see MBA changing my life, what are your thoughts about it? How can one come up with a compelling story?
That's a fantastic question. I think that the tendency to ask those questions from the institutions will be born of the fact that I think there came a point in which many people are applying for an MBA thinking it's simply a means to getting a higher paid job. And that's fine, but one follows the other. And why would you achieve that higher impact job or higher reward job? Well, actually, it's more about the impact that I was mentioning. So I think if you in your mind are able to articulate what you feel that you would achieve as a result of your MBA, you're going to be in that space. And I always think of the personal impact that a person is going to have should probably be measured in three areas. Certainly that's the way I look at my own and how the MBA would have helped me do that. I want to know how I can improve the impact that I'd have externally with either a customer group or an industry group or whomever I'm working with. If it's a community group, it doesn't matter. If it's the external environment, how am I going to be able to be better equipped to achieve a better outcome for that group? And then there's probably how do I achieve a better impact for any organization I would work for inside, and that's both the commercial piece and the team, that I'd be working with, and how would an MBA equip me for that? And the third is the personal impact. How would it continue my path towards growth? In terms of what do I expect to be, what would the leveling up be for me personally that would open up new opportunities to continue the path to growth and that acceleration? If you can articulate those three things, then I think you probably do understand why you're applying to an institution for an MBA, and that will give you the capabilities that will power you to start that journey, rather than thinking it's just a way to put something really impressive on my CV that's going to lead me to something. I think,
Right. And let's talk about hierarchies one last time. So in your line of work, what is the corporate structure looking like right now? Do you report to someone who reports to the regional CEO who reports to Satya, or how does it look like for you?
Yeah, so Microsoft, like other multinationals, works in terms of subsidiaries or the company groups. So I work in the Canadian subsidiary, and we have a Canadian chairperson or CEO, as well, who's there. And within that, we have a sector leader, and there's a public sector for Canada from coast to coast, looking at all entities from federal, provincial, and municipal. And so I report on one hand to my line manager, who looks after that whole piece. And yet at the same time, we are matrixed. So my V team that works under me also have their managerial lines that work through product groups or support groups. And the final piece to just add to the merriment is that we have a worldwide structure for both public safety and defence and intelligence, who are the people who are industry focused specifically in those sub-verticals to take things across. So I have the joy of working with many great people, all of whom basically bring to life Satya's aspiration.
Right, excellent. And referring to the conversation we had off camera where you mentor MBA grads specifically as well, what do you When you interact with such students, what do you typically see in terms of both their attitude, in terms of their perspective, and how do you help them achieve their goals or maybe widen their impact?
Hmm. That's, again, a fantastic question. Every student seems to be slightly different, to be honest, which is natural. We're all different people. But the journey we're all on is to try and make sure that we can achieve those three areas of impact. And I'm not sure that everyone articulates it the same way, but I try to encourage people to think really meaningfully about where they're going after the MBA. It tends to be that people who have entered from a different path may have just had a curriculum set out in front of them, and then they think, oh, this is the subject I really liked. I want a job in that field. And then they want to very quickly ask about how should I position myself to be employed in that area, whether it's consulting or technology or whatever. Better to think of your purpose, your brand, work out what your goals and aspirations would be, and then to think about what your fastball would be, what your fallback position would be, and how you want to progress on that journey. So I quite enjoy helping people to think that out a little bit and to be less linear in their thought and more systems orientated in their approach to life. Because, as I say, maybe it comes from my natural position of, which isn't unusual now, to have a bit of a portfolio approach, and that I've done many things on my way to this position. And I think that's quite common for most people.
Excellent. That's very beautifully put. Derek, what are your core values that you live by?
I think the central one is going to be a bit corny because I picked it up very early in life. I think I hit a vocation when I had the privilege, and I do go back to that word, that privilege to go to the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. And I know everyone doesn't have that, and I'm very aware that I had some privileges that others wouldn't have had. Their abiding ethos is about servant leadership. It's about serving to lead. It's in the motto of the organisation. It's everything we're doing. I'd been doing it for a very long time before it became en vogue in business circles. So, but I think it's impossible to see any of my fellow graduates who isn't really bought into that as the central tenet of how they live their life. I get a great deal of satisfaction from empowering those around me, and then really being able to celebrate with them when they achieve their highest aspirations. So that's, I think, central to everything that I do, and I love that.
That's beautiful. And now that we're hitting the end of our conversation, Derek, what would be your final thoughts as a recommendation for our audience, which includes both students as well as early career professionals, how to position themselves that would eventually set them up for success?
I think the first is, as we've discussed a few times, to think hard about your purpose. What it is that really speaks to your values and your aspirations, because that will be central to your journey throughout your career, wherever things happen. And you'll obviously want to find roles and organizations that are aligned with that. But to a point that you and I spoke about before coming in here, don't expect to be perfect every day, and don't expect it always to be, there in crystal and you to be knocking every ball out of the park. It's not going to happen. And therefore, accept things, iterate, move on, and be a little bit agile. But if you have that aiming point, which is your aspiration, your purpose, and your values, then you will be able to recalculate your navigation position and keep moving forward. And I think that degree of clarity is important, built around a central premise of flexibility and a fearlessness about it, just putting yourself out there, iterate, go meet people, speak to people. There's nothing to be gained unless you take a step forward, I think.
Right. Excellent, Derek. Well, thank you so much for your presence here. I really appreciate it. And as far as our audience are concerned, once again, do check us out on YouTube and do like, share, and subscribe to show your support. And until the next episode rolls out, do buy me a coffee, to which I'll provide a link in the description as well. Take care of yourself. Keep pushing yourself forward one step at a time, and take problems head on. And with that, that's my message. And this is your host, Usama, signing off, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.